Hey guys, this is Yoda. This will be my Dawnbreaker guide, in-depth probably point of view. This dungeon is pretty free on the timer. However, there are a lot of ways you can die in this key, and there are also a lot of ways that you can help your healer in this key as the Paladin. So I'm going to go over all of them. Hopefully, you guys will come out of this video a little bit wiser about Dawnbreaker. So this first pull is pretty easy. In fact, it's so easy we don't even lust it. We just send cooldowns. If we were to cooldown and lust, then it would probably die too fast, and then we'd still be sitting on lust, like running up the stairs. We did experiment with doing it like for 19, or I think we were doing it like on 18 under geared. But even then, we still had lust running out like as we were running up the stairs, so it wasn't worth it. So we just lost second pull. There are two Shadow Mages in this pull. Ideally, you're soloing interrupts on one and the group's on the other one. Also, this Ritualist is putting out some Tormenting Ray, sorry. I can randomly pick you, by the way, so if this picks you as a tank, it's actually a bad scenario because the rest of the group's not really taking damage. Just be a little bit more careful if this is targeting you. It also does put out Stygian Seed, which is a dispel. Just make sure your healer dispels it, I guess. You don't really need to do anything as the tank. So we finish off the pack and run up the stairs. This pack is a little bit more dangerous. And we do have Lust for it, but we have no cooldowns. This pack also features one interrupt, the Shadow Mage, and the Commander, which is nice to interrupt, but not really required. It has the kick it does, puts a shield on everything, and does a little bit of damage. However, the shield is bugged, and it does not scale with Mythic Plus, so you're basically getting hit by a Mythic Zero mob if the cast goes off. We still assign a kick because there's not really much else to kick, but it's not a big deal if it goes off. This Commander can be a little bit scary. The Tainted Slash hurts quite a bit. It is parryable and blockable, however. If you parry it, you won't even get the bleed. So you're kind of playing an RNG game here with the Commander. Every single bleed you don't parry, ideally it's cauterized or dwarfed or bubbled off. If you are forced to actually sit a bleed, especially if you're getting Tormenting Ray at the same time, that can be very dangerous. That's what you save your major cooldowns for, such as Guardian of Ancient Kings or Pain Sup, or whatever external, depending on the healer you're playing with. But usually it's Priest nowadays, I guess. So that's this pull. After this pull dies, uh, most comps will have 2-minute cooldowns ready, especially if you're playing with an Enhance and a Priest. When you have cooldowns, it's better to fly to this side, which is the side with the Commander. That's because the Commander is very much more dangerous than the other mobs. Like the other pack is just Curse Blade, which is an extra Curse Blade, which is basically Commander Light plus Shadow Mage, which can just be chain interrupted. So the Commander pack is the harder one. Ideally, you're coming here with cooldowns. Ask for PS on pull here since I don't want a bubble on pull. Honestly, bubble on pull is fine too, but I just asked for PS on pull anyway. Again, here you're playing basically the parry game with Tainted Slash. If you don't parry, you ask for a bleed dispel, or use your own like Dwarf or Bubble. If you have to sit a bleed, then you use a major cooldown such as Pants Up or Guardian of Ancient Kings, which I don't have up right now. Can also use Tear and Lay on Hands as a quote-unquote major cooldowns if they're combined. Also worth noting in this pull, the Web Mage will put out Bursting Cocoon on your allies. Once you get to a high enough key, if they don't use anything, they will die. If they don't have anything, then that's where your sack or your spell word comes in. Ideally, not using spell word if you don't need to, because spell word does have its uses on the next boss and the pull after that. But yeah, if they need spell word, you can use one here. Honestly, if you use on the next boss, you want to use like on the very first buster of the pull. Otherwise, you don't have it for the pull after. So either you're using it on an ally here or using on pull of the next boss. The Web Mage also only bolts you, and it casts Web Bolt at a ridiculously fast frequency. We'll see in the next pull. So even if you use Resonance, that actually doesn't even interrupt by itself. Here, I don't really know why I'm not just using Divine Toll. This is like kind of sloppy play, to be honest. Yeah, it should have just been Divine Toll and run in. The Shadow Mage here needs to be interrupted, and so does the Web Mage. Generally, I put the group on the Shadow Mage and myself on the Web Mage. It's because I just like, being in charge of my own bolts, basically, because the Shadow Mage can bolt anyone, and the Web Mage will always bolt me, so if I mess up, then I want to like be ready to suffer for my mistakes, I guess, or have a cooldown ready. Feel free to just YOLO use your cooldowns in this pull. It doesn't do that much damage, but at the same time, you want to be using your cooldowns because there's some amount of damage. And the next boss doesn't really need cooldowns that much. You can kind of get away with just having Ardent and Bubble and I've Tier. Okay, so we've killed that pull. Make sure you drop the bomb, by the way, on both boats. And we get to the boss. So this boss has a couple things that are very unintuitive. So number one, this boss's melees actually hurt ridiculously hard. And they can one-shot you if you have nothing up. Number two, the boss can teleport randomly. So if I were to pull the boss like over here, or from basically where we landed, then it would probably teleport to my head and smack me in the face with a melee, which would do ridiculous damage. We don't want that, so we need to pull it from the perfect range. If you notice here, I'm like almost exactly 15 yards, which is where the boss will not teleport. Boom. So it walks 2 steps and casts bolt, and then we interrupt it. So that's how you start the boss. And then this boss also has Obsidian Beam. By the way, the cast that this boss does, Shadow Bolt, does 0 damage. The only reason it exists is to be farmed for interrupts. So if you're a DPS and you do not benefit from interrupts, please do not interrupt the boss. Let your Paladin farm interrupts from the boss. Anyway, this boss also casts Obsidian Beam. This is a tank buster, despite the name. If you fight this boss on Heroic, then it's actually called like Obsidian Blast or something, and it only hits the tank. But on Mythic, it's Obsidian Beam. It hits the tank, and then it does this beam. You want to be rotating through Ardent Defender, which is good enough every time. Bubble, which is obviously good enough every time. And Tier plus 100% spell block plus something. So that something can be Priest's Shield, or your Holy Bulwark, or AMZ, or Rescue, something like that. Ideally, you're not using your Priest PS charges here, so you start the next fight with 2 PSs, because you shouldn't need them. So we bubbled the first one, now we'll have Ardent. Then the next one, I believe, should be Tier plus Bulwark. I might call for PS because I was like not quite as developed in my gameplay on this boss yet, but that is how I would do it now. So yeah, I do call for the PS here. I honestly should not be needing PS here. I should have called for AMZ instead. The other mechanics this boss does are not super relevant for the tank. So if you notice, she does drop Collapsing Knight. This is the only thing you really need to worry about. If you have 2 range, it always picks those 2 range. If you have 3 range, then it's 2 out of those 3. However, if you only have 1 range, then one of them will be baited in melee, and you have to run away from it every time. Since we have 2 range in our comp, we don't have to worry about that. The range is baited outside. Though do make sure your range are baiting it outside. The only thing you really have to worry about as a tank is if you're too close to these circles when Obsidian Beam happens, then that can cause problems for your group because they'll have to run through the circle while avoiding the beam, which is certain death. When you're deciding where to position the boss, you want to position, if there's 2 sets of circles, you want to position near the old circles. You can tell they're old because they're bigger. These circles grow over time. So if you notice, our 2 range just dropped the circles over there, and then these circles went away because they were bigger and therefore they're older. So I'm going to try to move the boss away from these circles here. Then it's going to cast Obsidian Beam, and we have a clear 360 around the boss, which is what you're looking for. We also have Ardent, so we're just going to use Ardent on the Tank Buster, and that's that. There is also a debuff that the boss puts out on your party, which can be dispelled, and then once that gets dispelled, there's a heal absorb. Although, honestly, if your healer is like connected to the game, the heal absorb is pretty free to heal through. This darkness comes, by the way, you want to make sure you maintain your tier set if you're playing Paladin, so do a finisher at about like 8 seconds left, and then you can mount and fly back. I save my my 3, whatever this button's called, for flying back. There's no rush to get out. We interrupt the boss, and we're back to normal. Tier set kept. You can see that Shadow Bolt just went off, and it hit me for absolutely no damage, so never interrupt this unless you are farming an interrupt for bonuses. That melee actually hit way more than the Shadow Bolt could ever dream to. Okay, Obsidian Beam. I'm not sure what I actually used here. I think I used Guardian. This is another error on my part, to be honest. This should be Bubble. All right, so we dropped the Collapsing Knights outside, and then the boss basically just repeats, so we finish off the boss. Next, we will talk about the church pull. So this is the pull that I've been doing and that most people do nowadays. There's going to be 3 Ellies. I don't know what they're called. Plus 2 casters, and I believe 4 or no, it's either 3 or 4 of these Shadow Walkers. So we start here. I actually spell word myself instantly on pull, and that's because these Shadow Walkers hurt a lot the first time you pull them. For some reason, I don't know what it is. These Umbra Rushes hurt a lot. The first one that hits you hurts a lot, and then after that, they don't hurt as much. Umbra Rush is parryable and blockable, so it might have something to do with having a lot of your like rolling buffs up. It's spell blockable and it's parryable, so we just start with spell ward, and then once they're in, they will do a lot less damage. There are 2 mobs you need to interrupt, the Dark Casters. It's not a big deal to interrupt them, but the damage can overlap with things that these Manifested Shadows do, and that can lead to a death, so just make sure they stay interrupted. Also, you notice one of these Manifested Shadows is marked Skull. Usually you're going to be coming into this pull with a lot of cooldowns. You want your group to be focusing down one Manifested Shadow, so that when they cast Dark Flows, there's only going to be 2 alive, so your group can actually survive. If you really want, you can stagger the pull a little bit, like you pull one, then like do a bunch of damage to it, and then pull the other 2. That way, it for sure dies before the other 2 cast Dark Flows, but that is slower, so we're choosing not to do that here. Also in this pull is a Tactician. You want to be pointing the frontal away from your range. We have our range standing over here, so ideally the frontal is going to be upstairs or this way. Also worth noting in this pull is that I didn't pull one of the packs on the side, so I have limited space to play with. And then another thing you need to worry about in this pull, there's a lot to worry about, is that this Tactician has another skill called Tactician's Rage. When this is active, you're going to be taking more damage than normal. I know this is only 1 mob in a pack of 10, but his auto attacks are ridiculous, especially with this Tactician's Rage up. So this is where you want to be using your cooldowns, if anything. It's not really possible to have cooldowns running for literally the whole pull, even if your priest save 2 charges of PS, although you get kind of close with 2 PSs. But if you use cooldowns, it's going to be during Tactician's Rage. If you do not have a cooldown and he has Tactician's Rage active, you need to be kiting the Tactician while fighting the rest of the pack. So that cooldown was Eye of Tyr plus Lay on Hands. Ideally, by the way, you're not using Bubble early in this pull, and you'll see why. Should be calling for PS here, although I might use Bubble. Okay, so yeah, we call for PS on the Tactician Rage. Aim the frontal away. And then now that we're going into Dark Flows, this should be Bubble Sack. Usually I want to try to save Bubble here for Dark Flows. Obviously Bubble earlier if you're going to die, but Bubble Sack on Dark Flows is very powerful. Okay, I'm just ego not bubbling for fun, I guess. Okay, I bubbled pretty late there. And honestly, my gameplay is not that clean here. I should have sacked with the bubble. Every time you bubble in a pull like this where multiple people are taking damage, you want to be thinking about using sack. This frontal is also kind of pointed the wrong way. It should be pointed upstairs. This is like okay, but ideally it's upstairs. Since absolutely no one will be standing in the church here. And that is kind of the pull. So make sure you have a very strong cooldown on pull. Like I literally used spell warding, so the Umbra Rushes don't one-shot you. And also, once the pull is actually grouped, you want to be cooldowning the Tactician's Rage. Ideally, you're not cutting this Tactician too much because you really want your DPS to be doing a lot of damage in this pull. I think I die here. Yeah. Unlucky. You really want your DPS to be doing a lot of damage in this pull because those Manifested Shadows are kind of like a time bomb waiting to kill your group. So you're not cutting the Tactician's Rage too much. And that's why you want to do a big cooldown rotation. Alright, so that is this pull. Next we fly to Dark Orb. I really like to lust this character because I think it's more dangerous than the AoE guy because it's harder to LOS. And also Dark Orb just scares me. If it goes off, someone can die. It is technically easier for the tank if you lust the other guy, but we've been lusting this. By the way, something I found out recently is that tanking on this wall is actually a mistake, and that is because there are mobs that can randomly be pulled into this pull, and they are from inside the tavern. I recently found this out. So this was after this video was recorded, so if you want to do this pull, I would recommend tanking it on this wall and not this wall. That is because the mobs inside the tavern can aggro if you fight on this wall. Again, this pull features one Tactician and your whole group is taking damage, so ideally you are cooldowning the Tactician's Rage and you're not cutting the mobs too much, especially during Lust. With Lust and 2s, usually this pull blows up. If you're in a pug, by the way, make sure you don't come to this pull if you don't have cooldowns. It is very important that this pull dies very quickly. because this dot plus Dark Orb can be deadly for anyone, and also you never want to leave it up to your pugs, like, to survive the Dark Orb, basically. To aim the Dark Orb correctly over and over again. Alright, so after that, we do a cooldown pull, the break pull, on this catwalk here. This is the first pull that we will talk about, which features multiple tacticians. So these tacticians use Tactician's Rage, and it's not really feasible to cool down every single one, every single pull. So what is our answer? The answer is to keep them together. When you have a cooldown, you can just tank it, usually, as a Paladin. But if you don't have a cooldown, the way you get away with it is you look at how soon the frontal is compared to the Tactician's Rage. So this is about Tactician's Rage in 3 seconds, but as you can see, he's about to cast the frontal right afterward. So realistically, as soon as he casts Tactician's Rage, we can still fight him because we're only gonna have to tank like 2 autos before he does the frontal. Boom, 2 autos, frontal. The other one does a frontal now, and then we can just run away, and they won't get ungrouped. Basically, they become like scattered when you have to perma kite and they're casting Black Edge while you're running away. However, if you keep them together until they cast the frontal, and then they cast the frontal, then they're kind of like stuck there anyway. So if you walk away, they're still grouped, basically. But if you're just perma-kiting, then they're just going to cast Black Edge, and then the rest of them are going to run, and they'll like scatter or spread around, which is not what you want. Here we can see that it's going to be frontals, both frontals into the Tactician's Rage. So we dodge the frontals, and I'm like, oh, they're going to Tactician's Rage. I can just walk away, and they'll slowly get to me, but they won't get scattered. Here we see it's frontals, and then I can just fight them for a while because they're not going to rage. Then it's going to be rage into frontal shortly after. So basically, just keep in mind when the frontals are going to be. You don't want to like run like super far away and then they start frontaling you from downtown, because the frontals are wider when you're further away. You want to be close to them when they're casting frontal. That's the gist of it. So these are the tacticians. Next, we're flying to this pull. So in this pull, again, it's another pull with multiple tacticians. Yeah, we love those as a tank. That you're not really allowed to kite, because if you kite, then the pull gets scattered. You start aiming your frontal at your healer, who's going to be pissed at you because they need to be spamming smite to heal through the Shadow Decay. So we need to be cooldowning pretty much every single rage that we have to take. And we are going to be using the tactics we just discussed. So also worth noting, these animated darknesses cannot go off. You need to interrupt them. Also, the first Shadowy Decay that this thing does is very dangerous. That's because your healer probably just arrived and didn't have time to set up healing. So make sure you are ready for that, especially if you're not playing tank. But if you're playing tank, you need to be ready too. Here we can see we're basically going to have to tank the full Tactician's Rage because they're not going to cast frontal during it, which is why we use Guardian here. Bubble is also viable. However, in my experience, it is better on this specific pull to bubble when you're going to have Tactician's Rage overlapped with Shadowy Decay. Also, you're only getting 1 Guardian, so I just Guardian here. And you're basically only getting 1 use of all your cooldowns, so you can kind of pick where you use them. I don't know why I use sack here. I think I use sack because I wanted to use bubble. Yeah, so I sack because I know the next one is bubble. It's Tactician's Rage overlapped with Shadowy Decay. Then I only basically have to get hit once. After these 2 frontals, I can see that they're going to both do frontal and then cast Tactician's Rage, so I know that I'm allowed to kite basically if I want to. We'll see if I actually do that since this video is from a while ago. Looks like I choose to just ego tank for fun, since I have tier plus barrier. I wouldn't recommend doing this. As you can see, I could have kited them for a while and then pointed the frontal into the wall here. But we decided not to do that, I guess, this time. Then on the next rage, I should be using Ardent. Yep. So basically, you want to be thinking about Tactician's Rage, watching the cooldown, and think about what you're going to do for the next one. As a general rule, it is okay to kite in this pull as long as you don't point the frontal at your healer. That is basically the only rule. You're not allowed to point the frontal at the healer, but you're able to, if you have to kite in that short little area in the house, you can kite Tactician's Rage. Next, we're going to be going to this tent pole. So my group actually doesn't do this pull anymore, but we will talk about how to fight this since a lot of groups still do it. Basically, you see one of these manifested shadows is marked skull. You want to focus it down one of these manifested shadows every time you see two of them. That's because they put out Abyssal Rot, which is unavoidable damage on your group. Then also, if they live long enough, they start casting Dark Flows, which is more unavoidable damage, so you want to focus one down. Obviously, also in this pull, we are featuring two Tacticians once again. Since I'm a bit light on cooldowns, I will be cutting this. Remember, you want to stay relatively close until they do the frontal, and then you can just do whatever you want. Although, I will say on this pull, it is quite important to keep the Tacticians on top of the manifested shadows. Otherwise, the pull is going to become very messy. This is actually kind of sloppy here. I should use a cooldown. Okay, actually, I do use Ardent on this when I'm tanking them. And they're both going to a frontal and cast the Rage. Would be surprised if I didn't bubble here. Yeah, so this is bubble. Tactician's Rage plus group damage is almost always bubble. And I also sack. And that's pretty much this pull. All right, on to the next boss. Or on to the mini boss, I guess. This mini boss, I like to fight right in this spot. And that's because your range can LOS in the doorway and you can just get knocked into the corner from Terrifying Slam. Against this is boss, this mini boss and the next boss are one of the reasons to play 100% spell block in this dungeon. You kind of need it for the Terrifying Slam. You can survive a Terrifying Slam, I think, with just 100% block and nothing else on this mini boss, but on the boss, you need a cooldown. Okay, we're kind of fighting this for a long time. This gun's kind of easy, so I'm kind of skipping over it. Next, we fight the boss. So, you'll notice I pull the boss to a very specific location right here, and that is right here. And that's because I want to get knocked into the fence post, but I also want to keep the Terrifying Slam, basically so my melee can still hit the boss. This, honestly, is kind of close to the fence post. I should take it, like, so center is, like, where my mouse is. So when I run off for the slam, my melee can keep hitting the boss. This time I do have bubble, so I just walk all the way out. Okay, so I did bubble and then I reposition the boss here. My sack is basically whenever the shaman wants it. You can also send Eye of Tear with sack. I didn't do it here, but that is something you can do. By the way, this boss's melees hurt a lot, so do be ready for that. Finger on the lay on hands, finger on the health pot, Eye of Tear ready. I don't really have either of those already right now, but yeah. This is Terrifying Slam. I run over to the lamppost so as not to get knocked back. Boom. And we use Ardent also. Ardent also gets consumed, and we survive. Dark Orb is on the melees. Another reason we tank it here is so that you can just shoot the Dark Orb. It's very clear where you're shooting it. And this distance is kind of perfect for Terrifying Slam. These ads are unfortunately spawned quite far away. By the way, getting aggro on these ads, you have 3 tools. Number 1 is Divine Guidance. 5-stack Divine Guidance is, even though it's like reduced damage or split damage, is still really good for aggro. You also have Divine Toll, and you also have Eye of Tear, which randomly is decent for getting aggro. So we go here for Terrifying Slam. We have no cooldowns other than Kings, so we use Kings. Do be trying to snipe interrupts on these, although like it can be a little bit annoying. You cannot let bolts go off on your group. Hopefully someone in your group is calling AoE stops if the key is high enough. You also have blind you can use if you're unable to snipe and no one's calling interrupts, or no one's calling AoE stops. I believe this is the scary overlap of the fight, so we'll go back real quick. So yeah, the ads are spawning, then the boss casts Dark Orb. As soon as the Dark Orb hits, the boss will be using Shadowy Decay. As a tank, you don't need to be worried too much about it, but your group should be, just make sure your group is like using major cooldowns here. You can also be ready to help, like if you're kind of in a pug and people may not be wary of the overlap, then this is where you would want to be looking for sack, spell ward, and lay on hands. Our group kind of has it covered, I guess. We have AMZ and a bunch of other cooldowns, so I'm not gonna commit that here unless someone actually asks for it. This slam we decide to bubble. The boss positioning honestly could be better. It should be like directly right here, like right between these two posts. So that's the boss, and the boss kind of goes on repeat. The only thing you really need to keep in mind is that the scariest overlap is when it does Dark Orb into Shadowy Decay, and also make sure you have a cooldown for every single Terrifying Slam. 100% spell block does apply. Spell ward also works for most of it. You'll basically get Terrifying Slam is a 2-part hit. It's physical and magical. But if you use spell ward and you basically immune the magical part, then you will certainly survive. The physical one won't one-shot you, but you still get knocked back. So we want to be rotating between Ardent, Bubble, and Guardian. If you actually have nothing, you can ask for Paint Up. And also you want to be using, if you need to, you can use Eye of Tear plus 100% spell block as a cooldown. All right, so that's the boss. Here I think healer died, but we res, and it's all good. Okay. Now it's this boss. So this boss does deceivingly high tank damage, by the way. Its melees are magical. So if you don't have a cooldown, you will get trucked. Here I'm actually almost dying through Guardian, which is kind of crazy. I think I'm actually trying really hard to save Lay on Hands because Paladin is very useful on this boss. So as we start the fight, we take stock of the group's cooldowns. Like right when we're running in, basically here, like while I'm drinking, I'm looking at my group's cooldowns. I see Evoker has nothing. DK has Veteran of the Third War, aka he's playing Death Knights will never die. And Shaman has nothing. So after seeing this, also we have no paint ups. So after seeing this, I'm like, okay, I almost certainly need to carry the first set of beams. Which is probably why I didn't lay on hands myself, to be honest. So we wait for the eruption. Boom, it picks the Shaman and the Evoker. So I spell word the Evoker. Shaman, I think, gets my sack too. Yeah, so we commit spell word and sack on the first set. That's because no one has cooldowns. If people have cooldowns, then you wouldn't be using your stuff so early, but this time no one had cooldowns, so we use. Also notice I pull the boss, or the mini-boss, to... Like, it starts there, but you actually don't want to fight it here. You want to fight it closer to here. That's because when the ad spawn, if you take the boss here, or the mini-boss here, then it'll spawn close. It'll be closer to where the ads actually spawn in, so it'll be easier to group everything. It's not super, super important because the ads have like some debuff that makes them do significantly reduced damage and have reduced health. But it is kind of nice if they're just grouped fast, especially for Shaman's P-Wave and stuff. So basically on this mini-boss, do be keeping your eye out for what defensives your group has, so you can use Clutch, Sack, and Spell Ward. Also, you have Lay on Hands and Holy Bulwark to be useful as well. And make sure you're rotating through cooldowns when taking melees because the melees are insanely hard, or hit insanely hard. All right, on to Rashanan. So one thing about Rashanan is if you're playing Lightsmith, Divine Guidance, you need to be literally under the in the middle of the boss hitbox or to hit Divine Guidance. If you just like are fighting the boss like over here, you'll miss. So do be aware of that. The boss doesn't really do much damage to the tank. So survivability-wise, you kind of get a free pass. The time you want to use your cooldowns is basically when the group is taking damage, so you don't require any extra help. And also you want to be using your sack and your both sacred weapons on people who are in trouble. So you can obviously Holy Bulwark is useful on people who are in trouble, but Sacred Weapon is also useful on people who are in trouble. And that is because of Tempered in Battle. So in this, normally, Tempered in Battle is other people healing you. But in this situation, since the boss is doing no damage whatsoever to you pretty much, Tempered in Battle is going to be used to feed your health to your allies. When you're doing that, do be careful and make sure you have a cooldown ready. Also in this fight, whoever is doing the bombs is going to be taking extra damage. We'll go back to when the bombs actually spawn. The first set. Okay, so the first bombs are spawning. The boss will shoot out 3 bombs. If any of these don't get picked up, they'll go off and put a debuff on the group.
I think there were some strategies in beta where we're letting that happen intentionally, but no one actually does that anymore on live. So whoever picks up the bomb will be taking extra damage. You can see like they're each getting a debuff here. He has a debuff and he's getting ticked for a lot of damage. Kind of surprised he didn't wall here, to be honest. But whoever has the bomb debuff for the longest, you want to be watching out for sack on that person in this phase. Here, I think I used lay on hands in the evoker, but honestly I have sack, so it should just be used on either the evoker or the shaman. Kind of just AFK brained, to be honest, in this case situation. That's P1. When the boss flies away, so we will actually not be chasing the boss, we will be flying to the webbed victim, and that is because the webbed victim will allow us to maintain our tier sets. Okay, I actually grieved and let my tier set drop. That is terrible. But normally what you would do is you would fly here and refresh your tier set and then just hit this webbed victim until you see acidic eruption is in 15 seconds, then you would fly. What I actually did is let my tier set drop for some reason and then hit the webbed victim and then say LOL I trash and then fly to the boss. All right, so we get to this boss in the last phase. Again, Divine Guidance is super relevant here. You need to be like basically on the edge, almost falling off in order to hit Divine Guidance. You can be like here where my mouse is and forward. Otherwise, Divine Guidance will probably miss. Basically where I'm standing. Like anywhere on this little stone thing is probably fine. But yeah, do make sure you're in the boss's hitbox. Otherwise, you'll miss. So on this boss, on this phase, again, you're not really in any danger, but your group is in mega danger. The people in our comp that are usually in danger will be the shaman and the evoker. The healer cannot get picked by these circles, so the healer's almost never in danger. The person who is in danger is the person who gets picked by these circles, by the way. The AoE, honestly, is usually fine as long as your healer is connected. I actually don't know why I'm using bubble sack here. It shouldn't be bubble sack. It should be sack on the spinneret strands, not the AoE. I guess it kind of depends on the healer, but generally with a disc, the person who's in trouble is the one that gets picked by something and not the person who is just getting hit by AoE damage. Here you should be looking for people to use your spell word and bulwark on. Honestly, I probably should have bulwarked the shaman there, but I just bulwark randomly in this AoE phase. I think this is a kind of an old VOD before having studied this boss a little bit more. Lay on hands is also for allies, not for you. I think basically my strategy this time when I fought the boss was every time there's anything happening, I'm going to try to contribute something like either my weapon or my holy bulwark or a sack or a spell word or a lay on hands. I try to contribute one something. That way we're safe on everything. After looking back, honestly, you just need to be using stuff on spinneret strands. The AoE, your healer should be able to handle. I think this is like maybe one of our first 18s, so I wasn't that confident we'd be able to do it, but usually you want to be using cooldown on strands and not the AoE. Use like group CDs, like Barrier, Zephyr, that kind of thing for the AoE. And that is the fight. All right, that is the guide to the Dawnbreaker. Thank you all for watching. Peace out.